Welcome to the Planet Purl video tutorial, our toe up sock class, week 2, knitting the heel flap. So when we last left off, we just finished our heel extension and we're ready to start the heel flap. So hopefully you filled in your chart and you can see we kind of have this crazy thing going on here where we need to attach that flap back up. And so that we can go back to knitting in the round. So remember we have those 10 stitches, well I have 10 stitches, but we have the stitches that you first knit off your needle 1 onto needle 2, and you have the stitches that you are saving for a rainy day. So first we're just going to knit across, and then we're going to go get those stitches that we were saving for a rainy day, that have been kept safe and sound on needle 2. Just hanging out, waiting for you to need them, which you do now. So now we're going to pick up and knit, and your instructions will tell you how many stitches you're going to pick up and knit the stitches along the side of your heel flap as we're heading down to pick up the regular part of the sock. So we're going to go in and hopefully you watched the video for pick up and knit, and we're just going to pick up and knit the stitches, and we're just going to be careful to pick up and knit to make sure we're picking up and knitting that whole stitch, which on the ones that have been where the decreases are can be a little messy, which is a reason to do your increases 1 stitch in or your decreases 1 stitch in, but we knitted according to the pattern on this one. That's a personal change that I would make to this pattern as well. But we're just going to go ahead and pick up and knit, and make sure that you pick up in that corner where the heel extension first comes up to the rest of that sock. So we're going to pick up and knit all the stitches that our pattern calls for, right into that corner. Right, so you can see we're now creating that little shape. So we've picked up and knit those stitches, the number called for by the pattern. And so we're going to turn the work around, and still just using needle 1, we're going to purl back. I want you to slip the first stitch and then purl back. All right, so we finished purling back here. Little time lapse there. Oh, that's a messy pick up and knit, but this yarn shreds like crazy. So now we're going to pick up and purl that same number of stitches along the other edge. So I hope you watched the video or know how to, if you don't know how to pick up and purl, we have a separate video for that. But now we're going to go ahead and pick up and purl those stitches, also making sure we're picking up that corner stitch at the bottom when we get to the end. Now our work is going to start to take on kind of a funky shape, and it's going to be a little awkward for a bit. But as soon as we start connecting them, you'll see how nice this all works out. It's a very simple shaping for your heel. So we're going to pick up and purl across, getting everything we need to start connecting that heel flap or that heel extension to those side stitches that we either knitted off the needle or that we parked, to create that cup shape that's going to cradle your heel and make your feet so happy. So we have our picked up stitches, our original stitches, our picked up stitches, and you can see now we're starting to create this little shape at the bottom of the heel. So now we need to join those sides up. So the stitches that are up underneath your ankle need to join the stitches that are at the back of your foot, so that we can eventually get back to knitting a tube. So the easiest way to access the stitches that are off to the right, those that you just parked until you needed them, is to just pick them up on a cable needle, or I always use double pointed needles instead of cable needles, and just pick them up and just push them to the end of the needle and just slide them off onto a cable needle, or you could use a stitch holder. You could use a very, very large safety pin if you don't mind sticking yourself. Or you could just use a double pointed needle, which is what I do. And this is just going to make them accessible for when you go to start joining those stitches together. Now, I hope you printed off my explication, my detailed explanation, because it's going to make it easier, I think, than the pattern is written. So remember these stitches. These are the 10 that I knitted off initially when we were starting this process. So now we want to go, we're going to knit those 10. We're going to knit the 10 that are hanging on our cable needle. And really, if you wanted to, you could take that 10 you knitted off and move them to yet another cable needle or double pointed needle. But I don't find it awkward to knit them together with the stitches on needle 1. But if you do, you can always move those stitches off onto their own little double pointed needle and let them hang there. So let's look at our instructions. All right, and so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a slip stitch texture, which is very dense and very soft and cushiony on your heel. So our instructions tell us to slip the first stitch as if to knit. And then we're going to knit 1, slip 1 as if to knit 1, slip 1. And we're going to do that all the way across. And this is going to create a really dense fabric on the back of your heel, which is where all the cushioning needs to be, where it rubs against your shoes. And we're just going to work across until we have 1 stitch left. And then we're going to start matching up our stitches. So instead of just knitting this stitch, I'm going to slide it back off the needle. Instead of just knitting the stitch, we need to knit it together with the first stitch on the other needle. I find the easiest way to do, especially since we're working on that double point, is we can just slide it right off the front there, being careful not to change the orientation. And then we just knit those two together. And that's the first stitch joined. See, oh, and we're knitting through the back loop. So we're just going to knit those together through the back loop. And we've just joined those stitches. And by knitting it through the back loop, it tightens it a little bit. So now when we go back on the purl side, we're going to grab a stitch off that first group of stitches that we knitted off the needle. So we're still just working back and forth, of course. So if we're working back and forth, we're staying just with the needle 1. And this time, we're going to slip 1 as if to purl, and then purl back. And we're going to purl every stitch. Now you'll find the stitches that have been slipped sit very tight up against the stitches that you actually knit. So just pay attention that you don't accidentally pick 2 up together. And we're just going to continue until we're down to our last stitch, right? So, but this stitch, we're going to have to join. So let's pick up the last purl stitch on needle 1 and slip it over to needle 2. And then we're just going to purl these 2 together. Just a regular purl 2 together. You don't have to go through the back loops. And that first stitch off of needle 1 has been joined. So now if you're working with sock yarn, you're going to have a lot of back and forth and a lot of stitches to join to get up to the back of your heel. Since I'm knitting on chunky yarn, it's going to be pretty quick for me. So I have plenty of time to show that to you again. So isn't this lovely how we're just going to pick up all these stitches and create just the perfect shape for your foot? And we're almost back to working to the place where we're working the round. So now here I have finished picking up all my stitches except for 2 on each side. So you can see from the back of the heel, you can see that slip stitch pattern on the back of the heel, but we are almost, see, isn't that nice? It gives you a really nice texture and it's attractive all at the same time. So I've got 2 left over here on my hanging out stitches, and then I'll be ready to work back in the round once I get those 2 stitches joined. So let's take a peek here. So we're going to slip and knit. One stitch left. We're going to move that 1 stitch off needle 1 and slide it over to needle 2. Or over to the cable needle, sorry. However that works. We're going to knit these 2 together through the back loop. And if you're knitting with regular sock yarn, you shouldn't have the problem I'm having with the splitting on this yarn. It's very loosely woven or very loosely plied. Then we're going to work our way back, using that same tip of the needle. And although the pattern asks you to slip that first stitch, as I get closer to the top, I tend to go ahead and knit it or purl it, just because I really like that tighter join rather than the slip stitch on the edge of that purl end. So, and now we've slipped the stitch off the needle, and we're going to purl those 2 together to make that join. And we have 1 getaway stitch. I love this yarn, but it's really a pain. I think I just split it again. All right, well, now that it's good and mangled, just going to tuck it on the end of that needle since it's going to be knit together anyway. And you see how close we are here? We're almost to the point where we're going to just knit around. So now we're going to go back to working on the 2 circular needles all the way in the round. So we're going to be going needle 1 to needle 1, needle 2 to needle 2, and we're just going to work in a circle, just like we started with when we were working on the foot. So all of our back and forth knitting is now done. So we're going to, since we're on needle 1, we're going to knit all the way to the end of needle 1. Now what we want to do is, remember how we started? We had the same number of stitches on both needles. Well, we want to go back to working the same number of stitches on both needles. And it's not really critical, but if you're working in a pattern, it will help you center your pattern on the leg, since one needle will be the back of your leg and one needle will be the front of your leg. Now you're going to also, if you're going to run a pattern up the side of your leg, like a cable or a little lace panel, you're going to want to adjust your stitches accordingly too, so that the lace panel or the cable sit in the middle of your needle. And you're going to do that by knitting stitches from one needle to the other. So in this case, I'm just going to do it as if there were going to be no pattern on here. And when I count, I see that I need still one more stitch on needle 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit, instead of using the tip of needle 2 like I normally would, right? This is how I would normally knit it. I'm going to stay on needle 1 just for one more stitch so that I can knit that stitch off onto that needle and make my stitch number even. So now, just as if I were normally working in the round on 2 circular needles, I'm going to go back and I'm going to match my tips again. So I'm going to knit that first stitch, pull my other needle out of the way, and then I'm going to knit the rest of that needle. So here I am, I've knit the rest of that needle, and let's take a look at what we've got going here. So I have my slip stitch heel, lovely. I have the gusset underneath my ankle bone, and now I'm knitting in the round. And this is the fun part, because first it looks like a sock, and now we're just going to go around and around and around in whatever pattern we choose. And not only whatever pattern we choose, but for as long as we want to. It's great to be in charge. Your homework this week, knitting the leg.